All right, everyone, settle down, settle down. Put the oat milk lattes away, silence your iPhones. Yes, even you in the back, I see the glow of that TikTok feed. And let's dive into the ultimate prequel. We're talking about the Notebook on Genesis. Now, I know what you're thinking, Professor. I've seen the movies, I know the Sunday school version. Let's get to the midterms. But hold on, you haven't seen it like this. We're looking at Genesis chapters 1 through 13 today, and we're specifically focusing on creation, covenants, and the origin of prayer. This isn't just a dusty genealogy, it's an investigation into how humans first tried to slide into God's DMs. The document we're working from argues that prayer isn't some formal, stiff ritual you do when you're in trouble. It's actually calling upon the name of the Lord based on a deep, personal relationship. Think of it like your Netflix algorithm, but for the soul. It's built on intimacy, history, and knowing exactly what the other party likes. Let's start at the very, very beginning. Genesis 1 and 2. Open your files. God, Elohim, breathes life into Adam. Now, stay with me here, because this is the intimacy build. God didn't just create humans to be cosmic decorative houseplants. He created them in His image. Why? Because He wanted someone to talk to. The Notebook highlights that from the second Adam took a breath, he was in a relationship. They walked together in the cool of the day. Can you imagine that? No awkward small talk about the weather. Mostly because God made the weather just pure communion. Adam's prayer wasn't a list of requests, it was just hanging out. It's the OG relationship status. But then, we hit chapter 3. The glitch. The fall. The serpent shows up, and let's be honest, we've all had that one friend who gives terrible advice. The fellowship gets broken because of disobedience. Suddenly, instead of walking with God, Adam and Eve are playing the world's worst game of hide-and-seek behind some fig leaves. This is where the Notebook makes a brilliant point. The intimate relationship was cut off, but God provided a patch. He provided sacrifice, shed blood, to allow them to commune with Him again. It's the first historical example of, let me fix that for you. Now let's talk about the kids, Cain and Abel in chapter 4. This is the first sibling rivalry from hell. They both bring offerings. Abel brings the firstlings of his flock. He's going all out, high effort, 10-10s. Cain brings some fruit. God isn't feeling Cain's vibe. Cain gets jealous, and well, you know how that ends. It's the first murder. But look at what happens at the end of chapter 4. After Cain is sent off to the land of Nod, Adam and Eve have another son, Seth. And the text says, "Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord." This is a massive turning point. The Notebook calls this the origin of prayer. It wasn't just saying words, it was a generational shift. People realized they couldn't do life on their own anymore. They started calling upon the name. It's like they finally realized they'd lost the Wi-Fi password to Eden and were desperately trying to get back online. Moving into chapters 5 and 6, we get the genealogies. I know, reading so-and-so begat so-and-so is usually where your brain goes to sleep. But look at Enoch in chapter 5. Everyone else lived and died. But Enoch, the text says he walked with God. He didn't just pray, he lived the prayer. He was so tight with the Creator that God eventually just said, "You know what? Just come home with me," and Enoch skipped the whole dying part. That's a 5-star relationship rating right there. Then things get weird in chapter 6. Nephilim, giants, and every imagination of the thoughts of man's heart was only evil continually. It's basically the comment section of a controversial YouTube video, but for the whole planet. God's heart is grieved. He decides on a system reset, the flood. But there's one guy, Noah. Noah finds grace in the eyes of the Lord. Why? Because Noah walked with God. Sensing a pattern yet? Yes, this will definitely be on the exam. Relationship is the currency of Genesis. In chapters 7 through 9, we have the ark. Imagine the HOA complaints Noah had to deal with. Excuse me, sir, your boat is blocking the cul-de-sac and it smells like wet llamas. But Noah stays the course. When the water finally recedes and they step off the ark in chapter 8, the first thing Noah does isn't check his mail or rebuild his kitchen. It's building an altar. He offers a sacrifice, and God smells a sweet savor. This leads to the first major covenant, the rainbow. It's God's way of saying, I'm not going to delete the save file again. Now look at chapter 10. We get the table of nations. Everyone spreading out. We meet Nimrod, the mighty hunter. Nimrod was the OG influencer. He was building cities, making a name for himself. But while everyone is busy building towers and trying to be mighty, God is looking for something else. He's looking for a specific heart. That brings us to the heavy hitter, Abram, later known as Abraham. Chapter 12 is the big ask. God tells Abram, "Get thee out of thy country, unto a land that I will show thee." No GPS, no Yelp reviews of Canaan, just go. And Abram goes. But Abram isn't perfect. If you ever feel like you've messed up your relationship with God, look at chapter 12. Abram gets to Egypt, gets scared that Pharaoh will kill him to get to his wife Sarai, who by the way was apparently stunning, and tells a half-truth. She's my sister. Technically true, but totally a dodge. He's basically ghosting God's protection out of fear. Pharaoh takes her into his house, plagues hit the palace, and Pharaoh is like, "Dude, why didn't you just tell me she was your wife? Take your stuff and go." It's a total cringe moment for Abram. But here's the fascinating thing the notebook points out. Even after that disaster, Abram goes back to the place where he first built an altar. In chapter 13, he returns to the place of the altar and called on the name of the Lord. He rebooted. He went back to the foundation of the relationship. The lecture wouldn't be complete without mentioning Lot, Abram's nephew. They're both getting too rich. Their herdsmen are fighting. It's a classic family business dispute. Abram, being the bigger man, says, "Pick a direction. If you go left, I'll go right." Lot looks at the plain of Jordan, sees it's well-watered and beautiful. It looks like the Garden of Eden, and chooses Sodom. Spoiler alert, terrible choice. Never pick your future based solely on the aesthetic. Abram stays in the less flashy land of Canaan, and God shows up again. He tells Abram, "Look as far as you can see. It's all yours." And what does Abram do? He moves his tent to Hebron and builds another altar. So, what's the big takeaway from these first 13 chapters? If you're just reading this as a history book, you're missing the point. The notebook tells us that prayer isn't a 911 call you make when the flood starts. It's the walking and talking. It's Adam in the garden, Enoch on his walk, Noah at his altar, and Abram at his tent. The central idea here, and write this down because it's the heart of the whole document, is that no extreme power can be wielded through prayer without a consistent relationship. You can't expect to have supernatural intervention if you haven't checked in since the 4th grade. The patriarchs weren't perfect. Abram lied, Noah got drunk, Cain was Cain. But the ones who succeeded were the ones who kept calling upon the name. Prayer in Genesis is shown to be the foundation of having a deep and personal relationship with Him. It's based on knowing that He is the only true and living God. It's an intense concentration like the Hebrew word hogah, which means to focus all your attention on God as if you're preparing for a massive life event. So, as you head out today, think about your own altars. Are you building them in the good times, or are you only looking for the rainbow after the storm has already wrecked your house? Genesis tells us that the universe was spoken into existence, but it's sustained through conversation. Class dismissed. And seriously, someone tell the guy in the front row that Sodom is a bad investment. I don't care how good the real estate looks on Zillow. The punchline for the day? Prayer isn't a monologue where you tell God what to do. It's a dialogue where you realize who He is. And hopefully, you don't need a flood to remind you. See you on Wednesday. All right, everyone, settle down, settle down. I know the dining hall was serving those mystery tacos today, but try to stay focused on me and not your impending digestive regrets. Trust me, the drama we're diving into today is way more intense than anything you'll find in a taco shell. We're talking about the OGs of the faith, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now I know what you're thinking, Professor. I've heard these stories since Sunday school. But have you really? Because when you look at the source material in this notebook, the prayer lives of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it's less like a dry history book and more like a high-stakes HBO drama mixed with a masterclass in negotiation. Let's start with a little perspective. If I told you to pack your bags, leave your parents' house, which, let's be honest, some of you are still dreaming of doing, and move to a country you've never heard of because a voice in the sky told you to, you'd probably check my caffeine levels. But that's exactly where Abraham starts. He's in Mesopotamia, a pagan, worshiping gods that frankly didn't do much for him. And then God shows up and says, go. No GPS, no TripAdvisor reviews, just a promise. Abraham becomes the ultimate friend of God, but he wasn't born a saint. He was a guy who learned to pray in the trenches. Now, here's where it gets weird, and stay with me on this because it's a total wait, what moment. Abraham's prayer life isn't just him saying thank you for my food. He was an intercessor. Think of an intercessor like that one friend who talks the bouncer into letting the whole group into the club even though half of you are wearing flip-flops. One of his biggest moments is when God tells him he's about to level the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Most people would have said, well, they had it coming. Not Abraham. He starts haggling with God. It's the art of the deal, ancient edition. He goes, okay, Lord, what if there are 50 righteous people? You wouldn't kill the good with the bad, right? God says, fine. For 50, I'll spare it. Then Abraham, and I love the guts on this guy, goes, what about 45? 40? 30? 20? 10? He's basically seeing how far God's mercy will stretch. He's standing in the gap. The notebook reminds us that intercession is standing between God's righteous judgment and the need for mercy. It's an ongoing commitment, not a 2-minute drive-through prayer. Abraham wasn't just checking a box. He was fighting for people's lives. But let's talk about the messy family stuff, because honestly, that's where the best lessons are. Abraham and Sarah are old. I'm talking AARP is sending them platinum membership old. God promises a son, but they get tired of waiting. We've all been there. You order a pizza, it's 5 minutes late, and you're ready to call the manager. They waited 25 years. So they try to help God out with the whole Hagar and Ishmael situation, which, as we see in the text, creates a family dynamic that makes your Thanksgiving dinners look like a Disney movie. It's a mess. But eventually, Isaac, laughter, is born. Sarah literally laughs when she hears the news. I mean, who wouldn't? But then comes the big one, the exam you didn't study for. God asks Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. Now don't look at me like that. I know it's heavy, but look at the prayer aspect. Abraham's faith had grown so much that he believed God would literally raise Isaac from the dead if he had to. When he's on that mountain and he sees the ram caught in the thicket, he names the place Jehovah-Jireh. The Lord will provide. He didn't just learn a name for God, he experienced a facet of God's character through a crisis. That's a recurring theme here. Your biggest prayers usually happen when you're out of options. Now, let's pivot to Isaac. Poor Isaac. He's often the middle child of the patriarchs. He doesn't get as much screen time as his dad or his son, but his prayer life is fascinating in its own quiet way. He's a guy who likes to meditate in the fields at eventide. Think of it as the original lo-fi beats to study/pray to vibe. But don't think he was soft. When his wife Rebecca couldn't have children, Isaac didn't just shrug his shoulders. The text says he entreated the Lord. He got serious. And God answered with twins, Esau and Jacob. And oh boy, Jacob. If Abraham is the friend of God, Jacob is the guy who tried to hustle God. His name literally means supplanter or heel grabber. He came out of the womb trying to get ahead. He tricks his brother Esau out of his birthright for a bowl of lentil soup. I mean, it must have been some incredible soup. Maybe it had bacon? I digress. Then he tricks his blind father into giving him the blessing meant for the firstborn. Jacob is a runner, a hider, and a schemer. He's the guy who's always got a get-rich-quick scheme going. God has a way of meeting us exactly where our schemes run out. Jacob flees to his uncle Laban's house, and suddenly the trickster gets tricked. He works 7 years to marry Rachel, the love of his life, but on the wedding night Laban pulls the old bait and switch and gives him Leah. Jacob wakes up in the morning and, well, I imagine it was a very awkward breakfast. He ends up working 14 years for Rachel. He spends 20 years with Laban, and during that time, he learns the hard way that you can't out-hustle your destiny. The notebook points out that Jacob's turning point, the moment his prayer life becomes legendary, happens when he's finally heading home. He hears Esau is coming to meet him with 400 men. Jacob is terrified. He thinks, this is it. Esau is going to finish what I started 20 years ago. He divides his family, sends gifts ahead to butter Esau up, and then he's left alone by the Jabbok River. This is the wrestling and prayer chapter, and it is the climax of the whole notebook. Jacob isn't just saying a prayer. He's in a literal, physical, all-night wrestling match with an angel. Some say a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ. He's 90 years old, and he's wrestling all night. Talk about gains, but look at his tenacity. The angel says, "Let me go, it's daybreak," and Jacob says the most iconic line in the history of prayer, "I will not let thee go, except thou bless me." That's the energy I want to see in your term papers, by the way. But seriously, think about that. Jacob is done running, he's done scheming, he's holding on to God for dear life, he's wrestling with the promiser, not the promises. And what happens? God changes his name. He goes from Jacob, the supplanter, to Israel, a prince who has power with God. He gets a limp, but he gets a new identity. The notebook says, wrestling in prayer means being able to take hold of, press in, and wait for the answer to be manifested. It's not a vending machine where you press a button and a blessing falls out. It's a struggle that changes you. Now don't miss the detail about the sheep. While Jacob was working for Laban, he used this wild strategy with spotted and speckled rods to influence the breeding of the livestock so he'd get the stronger ones. It sounds like some weird ancient pseudoscience, but it was actually a divine strategy. God was showing him that his blessing is what makes the difference, not just Jacob's cleverness. Jacob ends up incredibly wealthy, with flocks and servants, but the real wealth was that encounter at the river. So, why does this matter to you? I know you're thinking, Professor, I'm not a goat herder in the desert. But look at the patterns. Abraham teaches us about intercession. standing up for others even when they're a mess. Isaac teaches us about entreating God for the things that seem impossible, like a barren future. And Jacob is the patron saint of the hot mess express. He shows us that God can take a liar, a deceiver, and a runner, put him in a wrestling match, and turn him into a leader. The notebook mentions Romans 8:26, which is a great one to highlight for the exam. It says the Spirit helps us in our weakness because we don't always know what to pray for. Jacob certainly didn't. He thought he was praying for survival against Esau, but God was actually answering a prayer for a total heart transplant. As we wrap this up, and yes, I see you checking the clock, remember that these guys weren't perfect. Abraham gave his wife away twice because he was scared. Isaac played favorites with his sons. Jacob was a con artist, but their prayer lives were the connective tissue between their failures and God's promises. They didn't just pray about their lives became a prayer. And here's your takeaway, your put this on a sticky note moment. Prayer isn't about convincing a reluctant God to give you stuff. It's about staying in the ring long enough for him to change who you are. Abraham started as a pagan and ended as a friend. Jacob started as a thief and ended as a prince. If they can get a transformation like that through a little midnight wrestling, there's probably hope for your GPA yet. All right, class dismissed. Go eat something that isn't a mystery taco, and I'll see you next time when we talk about Joseph, the guy who had the worst siblings in history, but the best wardrobe. Don't be late. All right, everyone, settle down, settle down. I know the coffee in the student lounge tastes like burnt tires, but I need your brains firing on all cylinders today. Today, we're diving into the absolute chaos that is the later chapters of Genesis. If you thought your family Thanksgiving was awkward because your uncle started talking about crypto again, you haven't seen anything yet. We're talking about the Jacob and Joseph cycle, a narrative so packed with betrayal, supernatural wrestling, Egyptian high politics, and I can't believe he just did that moments that it makes Succession look like a PBS kids show. Let's start with a provocative question. Have you ever been so stressed about a family reunion that you literally got into a fist fight with a supernatural being? No? Just Jacob? All right then. We're picking up where Jacob is heading back home. He's terrified because the last time he saw his brother Esau, he'd essentially pulled a high-stakes identity theft to steal the family blessing. He's expecting Esau to show up with an army. So, Jacob does what any of us would do. He sends a massive "I'm sorry" gift basket of livestock, and then spends the night alone by a river. And here's where it gets weird. A man appears and wrestles with him until daybreak. Now the text implies this isn't just some random hiker, this is a divine encounter. Jacob gets his hip put out of joint, which, let's be honest, is a rough way to start a morning, but he refuses to let go until he gets a blessing. This is where we get the name Israel, meaning prince with God. It's this idea of wrestling in prayer that the study notes highlight. It's not just polite asking, it's that shamelessly persistent faith. Think of it like your Netflix algorithm. If you keep clicking on international thrillers, eventually it gives in and gives you what you want. Jacob survives the wrestling match. Meet Esau, who surprisingly just wants a hug, and then things go south again in Shechem. Jacob's daughter Dinah gets caught up in a local scandal, and her brothers, Simeon and Levi, decide that the best response is a massive, violent overreaction. They basically trick an entire city into a medical procedure and then wipe them out. Jacob is horrified, not necessarily because of the ethics, but because he's worried about the PR nightmare it's going to cause with the neighbors. Stay with me, because this is the setup for the family's move to Bethel. God tells Jacob, get rid of the strange gods, clean up, and get back to where we started. It's a spiritual hard reset. But then the tragedy hits. Rachel, the love of Jacob's life, dies giving birth to Benjamin. Then Isaac, the patriarch, finally passes away at 180. It's the end of an era. And then we get Genesis 36. Now I know what you're thinking. Professor, do we really have to talk about the Dukes of Edom? Yes, it's in the notes, so it's fair game for the exam. It's basically a massive genealogy of Esau's descendants. It looks like a boring spreadsheet, but it's there to show that while Jacob's family was struggling with drama, Esau's family was out there building kingdoms. It's a grass is greener moment for the biblical record. Now let's get to the main event. Joseph. If Jacob was the wrestler, Joseph is the dreamer. And let's be real, he was kind of a brat at 17. He's the favorite son, he's got the coat of many colors, which wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a you're gonna work in the fields while I manage the spreadsheet statement. And he keeps telling his brothers about dreams where they're all bowing down to him. Pro tip for the dating world and family life. If you have a dream where your siblings are subservient to you, maybe keep that one to yourself. The brothers decide they've had enough. They plot to kill him. But Reuben, the oldest, who's trying to be the adult in the room, convinces them to just throw him in a pit instead. Then Judah, the practical one, says, "Hey, why kill him when we can make a profit?" They sell him to some Midianite traders for 20 pieces of silver. It's cold-blooded. They dip his coat in goat's blood, show it to Jacob, and the poor old man is devastated. While Joseph is being hauled off to Egypt, we get this weird side quest in Genesis 38 with Judah and his daughter-in-law Tamar. It's a messy story involving deception, a signet ring, and some very questionable choices. You're probably wondering, why is this in here? Well, it's to show the moral decline of the family in Canaan and to set up Judah's eventual redemption arc. It's like a gritty spin-off episode that actually becomes important for the series finale. Back to Joseph. He ends up in Egypt, sold to Potiphar, the captain of the guard, and Joseph is a rock star. Everything he touches turns to gold. Potiphar's wife notices, and we get the classic temptation of Joseph scene. Joseph shows incredible integrity. He won't betray his boss or his God, but she's persistent. And when he runs away, leaving his coat behind, seriously, Joseph needs to stop losing his coats. She frames him. Joseph ends up in prison. Now, most people would be writing, "Dear Diary, life is unfair" at this point. But Joseph, he starts running the prison. He meets Pharaoh's butler and baker, interprets their dreams. Spoiler, the butler gets his job back, the baker gets executed, and asks the butler to remember him. And the butler totally forgets. For 2 years. 2 years. That's longer than most of your last 3 relationships combined. Finally, Pharaoh has a dream. 7 fat cows, 7 skinny cows, 7 healthy ears of corn, 7 shriveled ones. None of the experts can figure it out. The butler finally speaks up. "Oh yeah, there was this guy in prison." Joseph is summoned, shaves, puts on some decent clothes, and tells Pharaoh, "It's not me, it's God. You're looking at 7 years of crazy abundance followed by 7 years of total famine. You need a CFO who can manage the grain silos." Pharaoh is so impressed he gives Joseph his ring and makes him the second most powerful man in Egypt. Joseph goes from the pit to the palace because he could handle the pressure. Then the famine hits. It's a global crisis. Back in Canaan, Jacob's family is starving. He sends the brothers to Egypt to buy grain, except Benjamin, because Jacob isn't losing another favorite. When they get to Egypt, they bow down to the governor. They don't recognize him, but Joseph knows exactly who they are. His dreams from 20 years ago? Boom, fulfilled. Now here is where Joseph gets a bit theatrical. He doesn't just say, "Hey guys, it's me." He tests them. He calls them spies, throws them in jail for 3 days, keeps Simeon as a hostage, and tells them not to come back without Benjamin. He wants to see if they've changed. When they finally return with Benjamin, Joseph plants a silver cup in Benjamin's sack to frame him. This is the climax of the story. Joseph says he's going to keep Benjamin as a slave. And this is where Judah, remember the guy who sold Joseph, steps up. He gives this heart-wrenching speech, offering to take Benjamin's place so their father won't die of grief. That's the growth. That's the restoration. Joseph finally loses it. He kicks all the Egyptians out of the room and cries so loud the whole palace hears it. "I am Joseph! Does my father still live?" Imagine the shock. Brothers are terrified, thinking it's payback time. But Joseph says, and this is the key takeaway of the whole book, "Don't be angry with yourselves. You thought evil against me, but God meant it for good, to save many people alive." It's the ultimate, it's not a bug, it's a feature moment of theology. The rest of the study covers the move. Jacob, who is old and cynical, sees the Egyptian wagons and his spirit revives. The whole family, 70 people, moves to the land of Goshen. Pharaoh welcomes them because they're Joseph's family. We get a glimpse of Joseph's economic policy here too. He manages the famine so well that Pharaoh ends up owning basically all the land in Egypt in exchange for food. It's a massive centralization of power, except for the priests, who get to keep their land. As Jacob gets ready to die, he does one last Jacob thing. He blesses Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. Joseph puts the older son Manasseh under Jacob's right hand, but Jacob, the old trickster, crosses his arms and puts his right hand on the younger one, Ephraim. Joseph tries to fix it, but Jacob says, "I know what I'm doing." The theme of the younger surpassing the older continues to the very end. Jacob then gives a prophetic performance review to all 12 of his sons. Reuben is unstable as water. Simeon and Levi get cursed for their anger. And Judah, watch this, gets the scepter. The leadership is going through Judah. Then Jacob dies, and Joseph has him mummified, which takes 40 days, by the way, and they take a massive funeral procession back to Canaan to bury him in the family cave. The brothers get scared again. Now that Dad's gone, Joseph is going to kill us for real, they think. They send a message making up a fake deathbed wish from Jacob. Joseph just cries. He tells them, "Fear not, for am I in the place of God?" He reaffirms that God used their mess to make a masterpiece. Joseph lives to 110. He sees his great-great-grandchildren, and before he dies, he makes them swear a vow. When God leads you out of this country, and he will, don't leave my bones here. Take me with you. He died in a coffin in Egypt, but he had his eyes on the exit. So, the takeaway? Life is going to throw you in some pits. People are going to forget you in prison. Your family might be a walking disaster. But if you're wrestling in prayer and holding on to integrity, the famine won't have the last word. You might just end up running the kingdom. All right, that's it for today. Don't forget to read the genealogy of the Dukes of Edom. I'm serious, it's on the quiz. See you next time.